Hi, my name is Catherine Litvinchova, and you're listening to UA, the Day That We Survived podcast. And today's episode is special for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons is our special guest, Philippe from Luxembourg. Hi.
Hello, good morning.
And actually, the second one is the place where I'm currently sitting and recording this podcast. It is the heart of Urban Space Radio. It is a nice, cozy studio in Ivano-Frankivsk, where the history of our media and podcast platform began years ago. And what is special about it? It has like glass walls and glass doors, and it is situated in the center of public restaurant, Urban Space 100. So you can hear some ambience, like Christmas songs, maybe plates or people walking, or a coffee machine, probably when the lights will get on. So I hope you'll enjoy it. It's not like their studio usual clear sound, but it's actually the sound of a city which is alive during the war. That's what I wanted to share. So, Philip, our team met you recently in Uzhhorod while working on this project ELDA for the German-speaking podcast. It was actually a pleasure to meet someone from abroad. Like, you are a reporter yourself.
I'm a reporter, a freelance journalist, and an author. So I also write about this whole war in a more artistic way as well.
And when was the first time you've arrived to Ukraine?
My first time in the Ukraine was very shortly after the Orange Revolution, when I was maybe 18 years old, and I arrived in Kiev, and there was the orange flags everywhere, and you could see that something big had happened already. For me, that was very interesting to see, because at this point, I think it must have been 1 or 2 months after it. So people were very open and very much talking about these European ideas, and about maybe one day being together with the European Union. And so it was a very special time to be in Ukraine, because before I was a journalist, I worked quite a lot as a human rights campaigner, mostly for the Greens in the European Parliament and the European Young Greens. And we had a lot of projects in Eastern Europe, especially in Belarus, where I worked a lot with opposition groups and minority groups. And so Ukraine became a sanctuary for me, because when I was in Belarus and I had to leave the country after a project, I would often go to Ukraine, to Kiev, to just have some few days of so it's a time where I really learned to enjoy Ukraine as such, and the people, and all the friends I made at that time. So seeing that sanctuary attacked, or seeing that country under attack in 2014, and then later with the full-scale invasion in 2022, for me it was just, it was some kind of a wake-up call, where I realized that with my little skills of the language, and with my skills and knowledge of the society and of the contacts and of the people, I should definitely get involved. And so for me it was very clear that in the beginning of March I showed up.
In what cities maybe you've been so far?
I started out in March with reports on the border, because at that time, we had roughly 50,000 people, 30,000 people per day who arrived there. Then later on, I was in Lvov, and from there further into the country, and see the access round about Sumy going to Kharkiv. Then in May, I was in the Uzhhorod region for a story about the Roma people. And in June, I covered the medical train, which Doctors Without Borders is operating, which goes from Western Ukraine to almost the Donbas region to pick up people who are wounded. Wounded soldiers, but also people who are in a critical medical state. So it was a really, really humble experience to be able to travel on that train and see how they are operating in a wartime together with the Ministry of Health and the Ukrainian railways. And then already I came back to Ukraine, that must have been in September, October, to record a few stories of mine, which I still haven't published, but also prepared a podcast that we were already doing. So I had some preliminary interviews, which is basically, I would say, like a kaleidoscope. This trying to gather 12 stories which are maybe a bit symptomatic for the war. And it's mostly stories from journalists and about how they interviewed their subjects. And I think it's an interesting way, especially for a European audience. I mean, we translated it into German. We also feel that there's a big need to hear the stories, especially in Germany, and especially in the German-speaking world. So it's not only Germany, but Switzerland, Austria. My country too is also partly German-speaking, so we will be able to tell a story to this audience about the war in a more, I would say, in a more uncensored and more natural way. The podcast is coming out on the 22nd of December, and it's called My Home at War and War at Home, which is the title that we choose for the podcast. It will be available on Spotify. It's produced by Bose Park Productions from Berlin.
We are a big fan of your work in this field, where we also try to share as much stories as we can. We choose English as our language of our podcast because before the full-scale invasion we used to do only the Ukrainian speaking products, audio products. But we feel that we need as more voices as we can get in each and every language in the world, which we can also cover. So hopefully your podcast will be a success and reach as much audience as it should. And you seem like a person who know this context, like you knew the Ukraine before and after, so maybe you noticed what significantly or insignificantly has changed since the Russian full-scale invasion.
What really changed is the Ukrainian unity. I think that I have never seen a country as united as Ukraine as this at the moment, because people have common goals. It's not only one goal, but they have more goals, and these common goals are quite visible, and people work together to achieve these goals. As you know, right now in Europe, I mean, I come from a very small country, but still it's influenced a lot by the political debates which are happening in our neighboring countries, like in France or in Germany or in Belgium. So coming from that area, I think that what we see a lot is, that people are fighting a lot about politics. There are a lot of segregation and a lot of, I would say, divisions within the society when it comes to political debates, when it comes to democracy, when it comes to big topics and topics that are tough for a society like migration and all these topics. But I have the feeling in Ukraine there's much more unity. So I think that it's also very humbly or humble as a Western reporter or author when you go to Ukraine to witness that, because it is something that I think I was too young to witness when the Cold War officially ended in the 1990s. So I've never really had this sense of unity, and I never really felt that within a society. Also traveling around Ukraine, also more in the eastern parts, hearing people speak more Ukrainian than Russian there. So yeah, I think that something has really changed within the last months, and And maybe this is one of the few good things that have happened.
Yeah, and maybe you can also summarize somehow what is the current perception of Ukraine in your country or maybe the neighboring countries as well.
What the conflict has done for my country, most people know that Luxembourg exists, but they don't realize the size of it. So it's a country which is roughly like 80 kilometers long and 50 kilometers wide. So it's not big. And there are living approximately 700,000 people in the whole country. But it's a European founding country. It has been member of the European Union since the start, and it has also been a member of NATO since the start. And this is also an important information, because when the war started, our country, which has an army, was really assessing the situation and trying to see how can we help Ukraine. And they started out with delivering a few hundred NLAW rockets or NLAW anti-tank ammunition, which arrived also quite early in Ukraine, and they did that really quickly. And since then, they have started to send lots of materials to Ukraine, buses, but also Humvees like jeeps and armored vehicles and ammunition and winter gear. And I think that this has helped in our society to invite other actors of the society to contribute. Like only yesterday there was this huge convoy of I think 12 or 15 fire trucks that our country has offered to Ukraine, together with an amazing organization which does a lot of work here in Luxembourg, which is called Lukraine. So it's the Luxembourgish Ukrainian diaspora. So I think there's a lot of, from the official side, there's a lot of solidarity, and I think it shows that also a small country can do actually quite a lot. And I think that if you have this official position of the government, it really also helps the people to understand the war and to understand what is at stake. I mean, if a small country like we basically donate half of our army and half of our firefighting, I mean, this is a bit exaggeration, but if we donate so much material, I think it's important for the people to see that it is, people realize that there is a need for it. And I think if your government is proactive, it helps people to understand the real scale of the war. Because many people, let's face it, in Europe have been brainwashed, let's really put it like this, by Russian propaganda, by the outlets that have been very, very active in Europe. And that's the same in my country than in Germany, France, Britain, wherever in Europe. And I think that the main victory of these Russian propaganda channels was not that, all the things which happened with Donald Trump and so on, but the really main, I would say, the main goal that they achieved is that they made it possible that huge parts of the population are seeing Ukraine through these Russian glasses. And so they're seeing Ukraine as this brother state of Russia, which it is not, and as this former Soviet state which belonged once to Russia, which is it not. And they basically see Ukraine through these Russian imperialist glasses and these imperialist eyes. And that is a big problem, because even here, if you talk to academics and if you talk to members of parliament, or if you talk to even some politicians which claim to be experts on Eastern Europe, they will always tell to me, but I mean, I was so surprised by this war because the countries, Ukraine and Russia, they used to be like brothers. And I say, like, no, it's not true. I mean, if you are saying that, you are basically just repeating this Soviet propaganda, and you basically limit Ukrainian history to the moment of 1920 and 1921, Whereas before there was a history already of Russian occupation, there's a history of Russian invasion in Ukraine, and also a history of Ukrainian often bailing Russia out. So in moments of terrible threats to the Russian state, they always were there to help. So I think there's this very simplistic view which some experts in the West have, which it is not a factual view of history. It is an anecdotal view of history, which sounds good to the ear of Westerners because they have heard Russian lies for several years now. And then this comes to ears of these audiences who somehow had once written or read this in an RT interview or have heard this about. And I think it's a bit like a cancer because it is really hard to kill it. And for me, the biggest achievement that Russia has done over the last years was really, or the worst achievement is that they realized that many people in the world see Ukraine only through this imperialist Russian eyes. You hear it on the left side of the political spectrum, on the right side of the political spectrum, and mostly disappointing that you hear it from the more progressive elements on the left. Nevertheless, I think that this is still a minority, and we are talking, I mean, it's a minority, but it's a huge minority. I would say that's like maybe 10, 15, 20% of people, depending on the countries who think like this. But the majority of people is still supporting Ukraine very, very much and supporting the Ukrainian people. The solidarity in Europe is massive. You could travel by train or by bus or by car, whatever, throughout Europe, and you would see that every city hall has a Ukrainian flag, and every town has opened its arms for Ukrainian refugees. And so I think that is also a nice show of solidarity, which should not go overlooked, and which is actually what has helped so much in this crisis.
Yeah, and may I ask you what makes people care? What maybe makes you care, or what do you feel makes other people care?
I think talking to myself, it's really how I know Ukraine, and I know the country always as a sanctuary for me, and as a country that welcomed me, and as a country where I had some very, very wonderful times of my life that I spent there. So seeing this under attack was for me also pretty horrible. For me, the most horrible experiences of this war and of the past months have been when I was to places that I knew before really well and that have been under attack, or when I met people who now have different lives than before in the army, or journalists that now had to change jobs and who are helping in the army. So it's for me, it's something very, very concrete. It's something that I can feel and that I can measure somehow. There was once on Instagram Yulia Kuchetova, which is a photographer. I think her handle is CMare in Instagram. She's this photographer who also works with ELDA, who used to work with ELDA Academy. And she was telling how she got used to wearing the bulletproof vest in Donbass when she was covering the army, but then she wrote that it felt so strange when in September, October, these Iranian drones attacked Kyiv, that you have to wear the vest and helmet in your street, and in your apartment. And that is something which resonated really, really much with me, because I think I had similar experiences where I really couldn't believe it that in this city, in these streets where I sat before, that I had to put on a helmet and the vest. So this is my personal motivation, but I think for people, the main motivation is, I think everybody has different motivations, but we've had also lots of solidarity during the Syrian refugee crisis a few years ago. People were very caring and opening, and I think I'm not sure about this, but especially in Western Europe, people still know also, I think, the consequences of war. I mean, I was born in 85, but basically I, for instance, still grew up with the horror stories of the Second World War, being told how it was to live under German occupation, and I think that still many people still have these stories because they know their family history, how it was to be in the war, how it was to be in a big war. And I think that there is a collective trauma and also a collective memory that still exists, even if it's already now in the second, third, and fourth generation starting now, which I think helps people to take the right decision. And I have also seen a lot of people, so I covered some of the demonstrations here for solidarity and with the Ukrainian people, and you always find some people who are like heckling and who are like saying, no, you shouldn't help and blah, blah, blah. And it was interesting because once at such demonstration, there was a very old woman, like a granny, and she really went to this person and she said, you don't know what it was like to live in a war. I know it, and we should be very solidaric. And so I think this still exists in some of the countries in Europe, especially those who were occupied and who have had seen the fighting in their countries. So it's for me one of the possible explanations.
And as you work as a reporter in Ukraine, have you actually had this experience of war experience? Did you have it, or it was like the first time? How it was for you?
Yeah, I've been to a few situations where there was rockets and missiles being shot at targets very close to me. So witnessing that from so close was eerie at best and terrifying at worst experience, because I worked before in situations where my physical integrity has been challenged, like when I worked in Belarus at like the demonstration against the Lukashenko regime. So you knew that at any moment, basically, somebody could come and make you disappear. And I always, to be honest, found this more terrifying because I thought that if something like this would happen in like a country like Belarus where I worked, I always had the fear that you could like really disappear and nobody would know what happened. But in Ukraine, I saw this wonderful solidarity and how the firefighters and the doctors are working, and I've seen this firsthand. So I kind of had this very rational thinking that like even if something bad happens, it still will be, at the end, that there is a chance that either I make it or either I get help, and that someone will be informed. And it's really crazy because I think that only people in Ukraine right now in Europe, and if you have lived that, can really follow that thought, the thought that you think about your possible death and you think about the possibility that something really, really bad is happening. It's just something that doesn't exist, and I think it's something that makes it sometimes challenging to come back home, because for me personally, reporting about this and being in Ukraine, that doesn't scare me at all. I love doing it, but I find it much more challenging to come back and to be in a state of peace again, where everything is just working normally, and where, I mean, for me, after coming now recently back, and I arrived by train in the night, and I get out of Luxembourg main station, and I see like everything in this Christmas colors and Christmas decoration and lights. It was surreal. I wasn't really, something had changed in my visual perception, because I wasn't used to it anymore, to see so many lights at night. So yeah, I think that coming back is much more challenging than actually being there in the moment and working there. For me as a journalist, who is able and who takes his voluntary decisions to do this. But for the people of Ukraine, it's much, much worse.
We still appreciate so much what you are doing, and I kind of relate to this. Like, two realities, two neighboring realities. The one peaceful with these Christmas spirits in the street, and the other one where another concerns are still in the heads of people. But yeah, they try to to focus on something bright and good and hope, which holidays are usually associated with. But still they have these everyday challenges and so on. And what also amazed me with chat before our recording started about your recent tattoo. Can you please tell what inspires you to the level you actually made it, and what the main intrigue is actually what is it? If it's okay, if you're comfortable to share,
it's out please. In the open now. So basically, yes, I love getting tattoos, and I have quite a few. I mean, you wouldn't maybe realize that when you see me like this, because they're still all well covered, but as I think it starts with me also being an author. So basically, I'm not only writing articles, but I'm also writing poetry about what I see. And for me, this is the more direct method to deal with what you experience and what you expect, or how you manage with being in this situation of war. And it's for me also a very effective way to tell audiences about this, because when you are reading this at poetry and poetry slam events, people cannot run away. So they can, and sometimes they can choose to stop reading an article, but if you are doing this in a cultural, artistic setting, they have to listen to you. And so for me, this is really also a very good area where I can exercise my poetry and also share what I have been through and what I've lived through and what I want to share about the people of Ukraine. So in one of these texts I actually wrote that the lucky ones of this war have invisible scars, but the invisible scars are about the same as the physical scars, and they are invisible. You come back home and people just ask you, are you okay? You always say like yes, because you always say yes if somebody asks if you're okay, and then nobody asks anymore, and you're stuck a bit with these invisible scars. And so since I already like tattoos and have tattoos, I thought that I'd give myself another scar, but a scar where I control the healing, where I control the scarring, and where I also control the motive of it. And having been in Ukraine so many times this year, I think it's now almost about 10 times, I thought that it would be only wise to get a tattoo of Lesia Ukrainka, because having discovered her poetry like in the middle of this year, like in summer, when I was also in the Lutsk region, so where she was also, and so yeah, I discovered her poetry. I loved the fact that she was this proto-feminist and activist and also writer, and I loved just also as a poet and as an author, I loved this very simple and pure images and imagery and metaphors that she uses in her poems. And for me that was like okay, I said like this is the scar that I want to have. I want to share her picture on my calf, so on my leg, and because I thought it's also a bit poetic if you have it on the leg, because it's always this first step for me, like putting the right leg in front is like always this first step, and symbolizes also the fact of being able to go onto a territory and to make the step and go there. So yeah.
Amazing. I guess
very personal.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think it was Contra Spam Sparrow, the poetry of Lesia Ukrainka, which I guess I saw written on your pages on social media. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And also your story inspired some memories in me about the first months of the war. My family is originally from Mariupol, and at some point we lost connection to them, and it was like so much pain inside. And actually, as far as I'm not a poet at all, but to write down these rhymes, it helps a lot. It helps to relieve it, to somehow go through it. And I also share this with friends in Kiev, and they also told me that as far as they're not poets in ordinary life, sometimes they came up at night and go with writing or even like rhyme writing, and it helps. So it's amazing what this method can do to help people actually go through this.
It does help, but it also, and I think one should not underestimate it, it hurts. It hurts very much. When I write an article, like a journalistic article, it's all about having this rather objective view and trying to state the facts and get through what they say. But if you write an artistic text about it and you go into your own emotion, it's something different. It's really painful process, I would say, but yet it's something I feel throughout Ukraine, because I've realized at many moments of my journeys in Ukraine this year that you meet a person and you directly talk about these very traumatic things, and you don't see that in Western Europe. So I remember meeting this medic from the military, and like one of his first sentences was that he said that they've been through really a lot, and then we talked about what we have seen in this war and what we have realized, what we did, and there's suddenly this very deep human connection, and it is not a connection you make through jokes and laughter and love, but it's a connection through trauma, and somehow it creates nevertheless a real deep connection, because you are connected like from wound to a wound, and from basically your fears towards the other one's fears. I think it's a very eerie and very traumatic thing, but still it's also beautiful because it shows the human condition, and it shows how humans are able to be resilient and to connect even in these times.
I can agree on that. There is a beauty in humans actually who survive and who connect and who still can live and love and do things even through this. Maybe the last thing today, I want to ask you maybe something you would like to tell or wish for people who listen to us.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that anyone can do is participate, and don't get discouraged by people telling you that no matter how small you help, that it will not affect anything. That's untrue. The smallest things that you do have an impact, and I would tell every people to talk to their families about this now, especially during the holidays and the end of the year, to talk to their families about this war, how it affects them, and if they are, and how they could help by donating, by volunteering, by also by coming to Ukraine and telling the stories. I think me, coming from a small country, I am something like a local reporter, basically. I mean, Luxembourg, as journalists, we have a few hundred of them, but still it is like a local level journalism, even if we work on European and international and national topics. So I would invite also local journalists who are like writing for smaller media to come to Ukraine, tell the stories of the Ukrainian people, because I think that the local media haven't lost, or the readers haven't lost the touch yet with them. They take them as a big guarantee of independence. So you can help basically in this war in any aspect of it. You can directly donate to the military services, but you can also directly donate to food banks, to kitchens, to medical aid. So there's so much that you can do, and I would invite everybody to do it and to see it as a collective effort. And if you think that Ukrainians don't for the international guests, if you think that Ukrainians don't get this aid or that they don't realize this, that's not true, because people in Ukraine are so grateful. I met so many people who are covering the military who thanked me personally for my country's donations or military donations that they made. So even if a small country sends a few hundred rockets, people in Ukraine know this, and they realize this, and they are grateful for it. So I would really invite everyone to do what they can and to help on the scale that they can, and to be part of this Ukrainian resistance, and of this Ukrainian resilience, which for me is some of the most amazing things I have witnessed in my life.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have so much pleasure talking to you.
Me too, thank you.
I hope to see you somewhere in Ukraine.
I will be back very soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye, thank you very much, and Slava Ukraini.
Heroям слава. And you were listening to UA, The Day That We Survived podcast. Me, Catherine Litvinchova, was with you, and our today's guest, Philippe from Luxembourg. This episode was created with the support of Urban Space 100. Stay safe and listen to Ukrainians.